Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told out of Voice of Radio. So today, we need to do a Patreon video. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. You see, over on patreon.com/PTCG Radio, you can support the channel. You can get weekly bonus podcasts, some of which I've recorded live with you lovely ladies and gentlemen. And if you join the highest tier, you can go, Wossy, make me a video, like I'm some kind of performing seal. Well, the lovely Daniel Newton has gone and supported over on Patreon, on the highest tier, and has asked for a video, the top 10 starting Pokemon cards of all time. Now, I thought this might be fun, so a couple of caveats before we get rolling. First of all, we should say first partner Pokemon, not starters, but then again, no one actually says that. Secondly, we're not doing the top 10 Pokemon, we're doing the top 10 cards, but I don't want to put any one Pokemon on here more than once. So we're not doing every Blastoise card or every Charizard lumped in together. We are doing the top 10 cards, but as you're going to see as we go, it's very difficult, most of these, to actually limit them to one card. You'll see what I mean as we go through. And sorry to Grass Pokemon, they are not well represented on this list. Incidentally, right, when we're looking at first partner Pokemon, Water are the best, then Fire, then Grass. In the TCG, that is a ranking that's very hard to argue with. Now, an honourable mention here to Meganium. There were a couple of Meganium which made a little bit of an impact here or there. The Meganium Prime that came around in Heart Gold Soul Silver had an ability to let you move your grass energy around the field as you like, move off to heal and then move it back and move to new Pokemon, etc. It is of course the exact same ability that we saw on base set Venusaur, which saw a little bit of play here and there, but it was never really a card either version of it which was good enough to make a huge impact. We could also have popped on the Meganium EX from Unseen Forces. This was a nice little rogue deck at the time. It let you just attach a grass energy from your hand to one of your Pokemon. Now the reason this was really good is at the time we had Holon's Pokemon like Holon's Electrode that you could attach like a double energy card, but only if there was already an energy on there. And then you had to return that energy to your hand. So what you would do is attach with Meganium and then swap it for Holon's Electrode to get yourself an extra cheeky attachment. It was fun, but it was a worse version of a card that comes much higher up on the list. So in at number 10, I'm going TURTWIG GL from Rising Rivals. Now, feel free to be mad at me about this, but there really was not a good number 10, and I love this Turtwig. Turtwig had a lovely Pokebody that said if its remaining HP was 60 or less, each of its attacks did 30 more damage. But far more interesting was the attack Giga Drain that did 30 damage and you healed as much damage as you did. And then we got silly. You see, we had Expert Bout. Now, Expert Bout meant you gave up a second prize, but it also meant that you had an extra 20 HP and did an extra 20 damage. So now you had 20 more HP and were healing 20 every turn. We had Shaman Level X that gave your grass Pokemon an extra 40 HP. So now you've actually gone that little bit higher. You've gone from 90 to 110 up to 150. So that was a fun little one you could use. We had Snowpoint Temple, which gave your unevolved Turtwig an extra 20 HP. So now it's gone up as high as 170. And then we had Cherim that made your attacks do extra damage. We had Plus Power that made your attacks do extra damage. And basically here, what we saw was a Pokemon that was extremely difficult to KO, especially bearing in mind how much damage things generally did back then, and was healing up pretty much entirely every turn, and it got kind of hilarious, kind of quickly. But then on to the actual Pokemon that really earned their way onto the list. In at number 9, we've got Swampert. A pair of Swampert that really did, well, they were one of the very best decks around for quite a while. And it was printed as a Worlds deck because it was a junior finalist deck from 2004. And it really did revolve around Swampert and Swampert EX. Now, the Swampert from EX Ruby and Sapphire let you attach a water energy from your hand to your active, so it acted as a little bit of energy acceleration. And then Swampert EX did 20 damage, plus 20 more for each basic energy attached to Swampert EX. Now, it also did have an attack that just did 40 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon, and then you flipped a coin if heads your opponent discarded an energy, but really what we were doing here was just piling energy on and smashing. Bearing in mind, at the time, there were lots of very relevant fighting weak Pokemon, which was very nice. We had Delcatty to discard an energy and draw free cards, but then we had Magneton that would get an energy back from your discard pile. Well, you discarded one card from your hand to get 2 energy back from your discard pile. And then you add in Wobbuffet to give you an answer to Pokemon EX. And it really was a very, very nice deck indeed that really did put in an awful lot of work. It was a very good deck. In at number 8, we've got the Emboar from Black and White. And the Emboar from Black and White came along with the ability Inferno Fandango that let you attach as many fire energy cards from your hand as you like to your Pokemon. Now, this actually won the World Championships in the Masters Division in 2011. Shout out to David Cohen for doing that. And it was all to do with Emboar Magnezone. And dual stage 2 decks are not supposed to work. But Magnezone had a Pokepower to let you draw until you had 6 cards in your hand. You always went Magnezone first. So that was a draw engine that let you play double stage 2s. And then it let you Lost Zone as many energy attached to your Pokemon as you like, doing 50 damage for each energy Lost Zoned in this way. And then, of course, you would get lots of energy on the field with Emboar, and then you would Lost Zone them using Magnezone. The other card that was really important here was Entei Raikou Legend that let you do 80 damage to each Pokemon in play, yours and your opponent's, that had a Pokepower, and back then that could wipe entire boards. Pre-Heart Gold Soul Silver, we had stuff like Uxie and Claydol that were phenomenal, and post Heart Gold Soul Silver we had stuff like Smeargle and Shaman that were similarly phenomenal. And essentially what you would do here is you just wreck everybody's board, and it would be kind of hilarious for you playing the card, somewhat less hilarious for your opponent, who would be beaten by X. Now, Decidueye GX was a very nice one, but it's extremely difficult to know where to put this on the list, because it all depends on whether you count Forest of Giant Plants. You see, Forest of Giant Plants was a stadium card that let you evolve your grass Pokemon whenever you felt like it. And combined with Decidueye, it was ridiculous. Decidueye's ability let you drop 2 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon, on one of them anyway, but it was 1 per Decidueye, so you would just use Forest of Giant Plants to get 3 or 4 in play, and just be dropping lots and lots of extra damage. It was often played with Vileplume to block your opponent from being able to use item cards, and you as well, but you wouldn't rely on it because you would know that you were playing Vileplume, and it was just dumb. And before Forest of Giant Plants got banned, this was a phenomenal meta-defining card, and after Forest of Giant Plants got banned, it was a fun little rogue deck. So it's hard to know exactly where we fall with this, but I'm still putting it in at number 7. Feel free to be mad at me. In at number 6, we've got Greninja, and there really is no way to just talk about one Greninja card. We need to talk about 3. Now, the main one here was a Greninja from Breakpoint that had the attack Shadow Stitching. 1 colorless energy and you did 40 damage, but it turned off your opponent's abilities during their next turn, which was awesome. And there were an awful lot of games where you would just sit there turning off their abilities and they would lose, and that was it. You did also have Moonlight Slash that did 80 damage, as long as you returned a water energy from this Pokemon to your hand, but mostly you were Shadow Stitching. But then you had the Greninja from X and Y that said that once during your turn you could discard a water energy from your hand and put 3 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. So yeah, your damage output was fairly low, but you were turning off their abilities, while dropping extra damage. If anyone's wondering, the Greninja mirror match was one of the, and I say this sincerely, one of the most boring mirror matches in the history of Pokemon, and I don't say that lightly. But then we added in Greninja Break. Now, for those of you that weren't playing back then, a Break was a card you put on top of a card. So you put Greninja Break on top of Greninja, and it went up to 170 HP, gained a new ability, but had the attacks and abilities of the Pokemon under it. And it said that once during your turn, you could discard a water energy from your hand and put 6 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. You could not discard one energy to do both abilities. They did have to be separate energies. But you were just dropping so much damage here while blocking your opponent from using abilities. And it was just, I mean, it sucked to play against, and the mirror matches were horrible. But it was one of the best decks in the format. It made the final of Masters in Worlds. It won Seniors in 2016. Shout out to Cody Walensky. It was, for years, one of the very best decks around. Even when the X and Y Greninja got rotated, it still remained amazing. In at number 5, Typhlosion Prime. Now, there are other Typhlosion that we could mention here. Typhlosion has had some really good cards over the years. The Typhlosion from Neo Genesis allowed you to flip a coin, and if heads, you attached a fire energy from your discard pile to one of your fire Pokemon, and then had an attack that you flipped a coin. If heads, it did 80 and 20 to Typhlosion. If tails, it just did 60. That was a fun little deck, which was very, very nice. But I think the best Typhlosion we ever got was the Prime from Heart Gold Soul Silver. And this was, it didn't even make the final of Worlds in 2011, but it was the de facto best deck going into Worlds. Now, Typhlosion had an ability that once during your turn, attached a fire energy from your discard pile to one of your Pokemon, putting a damage counter on that Pokemon. And this was the partner for Reshiram. And in a lot of ways, this was an extremely straightforward deck. Reshiram, free energy, 120, discard 2 energy, but then you attach for turn Typhlosion, you're rolling, and 2 energy, 20 damage plus 10 more for each damage counter on this Pokemon. But remember that when you accelerated energy with Typhlosion, you did then pop a damage counter onto it. So that would actually really help you out in that regard, because then you'd be fueling the Outrage attack. But most of the time, Typhlosion, it really was just accelerate energy to Reshiram, and 120 at the time was big. You can see Typhlosion's got 140, plus power was legal at the time. Reshiram was knocking out among the biggest Pokemon in the game, and it was incredibly consistent. It was a very straightforward deck. There wasn't much pizzazz to it. But in terms of consistent decks that just won tournament after tournament, you'd be hard-pressed to find one better than Typhlosion. And it may have missed out on a final appearance in the Masters division, but it did get printed as a Worlds deck when it won the Senior division in 2011. Yeah, it really was like a phenomenal deck. Also, 2011, really good year for first partner Pokemon, at least fire ones, in the Pokemon TCG. Coming in at number 4, we've got Empoleon, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to cheat a little bit here, because you see, we had 2 really good Empoleon coming around in consecutive years. In 2007, the Diamond and Pearl Empoleon was a very strong deck, one of the best decks in the world, and in 2008, it gave way to Majestic Dawn Empoleon, and it's very hard to pick between them. And they both were one of the best decks at Worlds in the year they were there. So let's call it a tie. The Diamond and Pearl Empoleon, for 2 energy, let you do 40 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. For 3 energy, you did 70 to the active and 20 to one of your opponent's bench. But the trick here was that this was a beefy Pokemon with decent attacks that could use Cessation Crystal to turn off Poke Powers and Poke Bodies, what we used to call abilities, and that was huge because so many decks back then really relied on them. By turning it off, you gave yourself a massive advantage, and also it was literally just an Empoleon deck that did not play very, very many other Pokemon at all, which gave you lots and lots of room for stuff like Cessation Crystal. Moving forward a year, we had the Empoleon from Majestic Dawn with significantly better art, I should add. 2 energy, 30 damage to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon. 3 energy, 50 damage plus 10 more for each of your bench Pokemon. But you flip a coin and if tails you do 10 to each of your bench Pokemon. Now there were lots of similarities here. Again, we're talking big bulky Pokemon. We're talking spreading damage around. We're talking Cessation Crystal and no reliance on abilities. It was a bit more tricksy and it did use the Dusknoir from Diamond and Pearl to control your opponent's bench, which was fun. But it was remarkably similar to the previous year's Empoleon, and that's why I can't pick between them, because they came 1 year apart, but really were very similar decks that worked in a similar kind of manner. Speaking of similar decks, in at number 3, we've got Blaziken, which was the best deck around, or everyone thought it was the best deck until the Japanese players came around to Worlds and dominated with Team Magma, but other than that, it was the best deck in the world. And it was so weirdly similar to the Swampert deck that we talked about a few spots ago. We had an EX from Team Aqua versus Team Magma. We had a single prize from EX Ruby and Sapphire. That's true for both Swampert and Blaziken. And the non-EX Accelerated Energy so that the EX could attack. They are weirdly parallel decks here, like weirdly creepily similar decks. Now the Blaziken from EX Ruby and Sapphire had the Poké Power Fire Starter. Once during your turn, you could attach a Fire Energy from your discard pile to one of your bench Pokemon. We then had Blaziken EX that for 2 energy did 30 damage, flip a coin 50 on a heads, 30 and burn on the tails, and for 4 energy you discarded 2 of them, but then you did 100 to one of your opponent's Pokemon, bearing in mind that with Blaziken you could recover that energy fairly easily, and back then very few Pokemon had more than 100 HP. The other card that was really important here was Team Aqua's Manectric, that let you move basic energy from one of your Pokemon with Team Aqua in its name to another of your Pokemon. So what you would do, of course, is you would use your non-EX Blaziken to accelerate energy to Manectric, so you could then move it to your active Blaziken, and you could be attaching 2 extra energy every turn. 1 from your hand, and then 1 using Blaziken onto Manectric onto Blaziken. Very, very nice indeed. In at number 2, we've got Feraligatr. And again, Feraligatr is one of those where we really could have gone multiple different ways. In Neo Genesis alone, there were 2 Feraligatr, and they were both awesome. The lesser played Feraligatr had the Pokemon Power Berserk that let you flip a coin when you evolved it, and you flipped a heads to discard the top 5 cards of your opponent's deck, and tails to discard 5 from yours. And for 4 energy, you did 50 damage and flipped a number of coins equal to the number of damage on Feraligatr, doing 10 more for each heads. So that could be a bit of a mill deck with a pretty nice attack as well. And don't sleep on Dark Feraligatr, which was actually a really good deck in the same format as the Feraligatr. We'll get there in a minute. As long as it was your active Pokemon, it basically turned off baby Pokemon that were huge at the time. And that was kind of awesome. Seriously, it was the Cleffa format, and there were lots of babies, and this just turned them all off. But the real good Feraligatr was the one that had Riptide. The Pokemon Power let you as often as you like during your turn discard a water energy from your hand, and then the attack for 3 energy did 10 damage, plus 10 more for each water energy in your discard pile, and then you shuffle them all from your discard pile into your deck. This allowed damage output the likes of which Pokemon back then just didn't have. Bearing in mind Feraligatr is a giant stage 2 that only has 120 HP. This could get up to silly damage. We see a lot of the other older Pokemon on this list that are specifically limited in the